localization of SDGs, and that I think is essential and important for us for putting the house in order. Because until unless we have statistics, particularly the targets and indicators in place, we would not be able to get the right results that we are expecting. In the inaugural session yesterday, His Excellency Mr. Cadell had also highlighted this very question of localization, and that localization is important in terms of getting the statistics and various parameters together. Second point, which could not come in today much, is in terms of adoption and diffusion of our science, technology, innovation policy, and how through technology we are trying to enhance inclusion or avoid exclusions which are happening. And third point is the very strategy on our localization of SDGs. The idea of vulnerability, as Mr. Pepersenia very rightly mentioned, would have to be at the village level. And one would have to see what kind of cooperation is possible with the communities. But if you see and juxtapose that in the larger sub-regional context of South Asia, what kind of cross-border development projects and initiatives we can think of, particularly the vulnerability of the border community, the people who are at the borders, they are neglected from both sides. And how instead of gun-trotting soldiers on our borders, we can have people who are messengers of economic development, of prosperity. So the framework of AEI, Access, Equity and Inclusion, which in the 12th five-year plan we did discuss, hasn't moved much forward, I think is important. So without further ado, now I must stop and give the floor back to Mr. Ratna for any logistical announcements. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor Chaturvedi, for a very excellent and efficient way of organizing the program. You started late and finished on time. Thank you and congratulations. We'll take a short break for 15 minutes for tea, and we come back here at 11:30 for the next session. May I also urge all those participants who were given the questionnaire but have not responded to, please do so. Our colleagues will be approaching you because that is very essential part of our creating efficiency in our functioning. Thank you very much. Can I request the chair, keynote speaker, and the panelists for session 6 to please come on the stage? Welcome back. Can I request all the participants to please be seated? We are starting the session now. Thank you all. We are now starting session 6, which is on the means of implementation of the SDGs in the South Asia, which will identify the key gaps in certain areas which relate to finance, technology, and capacity building, emanating from SDG Goal 17. It's our privilege as hosts to have so many eminent persons coming from South Asia, including India. First of all, I would welcome Dr. Abid Suleri, Executive Director, Sustainable Development Policy Institute of Islamabad. He's also a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council of Pakistan. Dr. Suleri, you have the floor to conduct the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think this session has evolved. So we started with the key SDGs. We discussed what our governments have been doing to achieve those SDGs, what are the plans. This morning, we looked at, of course, the whole debate on right to development and how this agenda, taking everyone along, that can be fulfilled. So, of course, now it is a time when we have to discuss about the implementation, and especially in implementation, it's about finances, it's about technology and capacity building. But one thing that keeps, when I compare MDGs versus SDGs, one distinct difference that I can feel, not only in this room and yesterday's discussion, but generally among policymakers, MDGs were perceived as something which was external, it was perceived something which was projectized, it was perceived something which had the developing nation, they were thinking that it would come with some sort of money bill or some sort of aid, and then they would have to do it. But SDGs, now they have been indigenized, and I can see this growing realization that I don't have to send my child to school because my neighbor is telling me or because the rest of the community members are telling me. I have to do it in any case because I want my child to get educated, or I don't need my child to get vaccinated because someone else is telling me. And this whole realization, I think that has changed the dynamics of implementation. But having said it, with this paradigm shift, finances, they are still important. Technology transfer is important. Capacity building is important. And when we're talking of financing, we need to think of innovative ways of financing. So it's not only the typical development aid. We are talking of public-private partnerships. We are also talking of private sector. We are talking of spending our own endowments and spending our own development funds from the states or from the regional levels. And also the collection of revenue, not only at the union's state's responsibility, but also the sub-regional revenue collection for sub-regional spending. So there are quite a few ways and thoughts and practices that different governments they are undertaking in the region. And that's what this panel would try to explore, what is working where, how we can replicate it, what are the gaps, and how we can learn from each other. We have 7 discussants and, of course, a keynote speaker. So, of course, would be quite scarce on time. So, without ado, I'll request Dr. Rathin Roy to give his keynote speech, some opening remarks for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come to the discussants 5 minutes each. Dr. Rathin Roy is the Director, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and that always somehow attracts me, this combination of finance and policy. So I have seen in whole of my life big tussle and big distrust between policymakers and financial managers, but someone coming from finance and policy background, so I'm sure that you can shed light on implementation of SDGs, and then we'll come to the respective panelists. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's like to first start by thanking ESCAP for inviting me to give you my thoughts sort of separately from the panel, and that is because I think I have thoughts that you might find sort of somewhat unusual from the run-of-the-mill discussion on SDG financing and means of implementation. Let me start by saying that I find it very significant that I used to be in the UN, so I've done dozens of these. Every conference on SDGs, means of implementation is always towards the end. And as an economist, I find this weird. Because, you know, if SDG conferences are going to be a report card on what governments are doing, then don't have a panel on means of implementation. Because then you know what your finances are, you're telling me what you're doing. But if you are actually conscious that there is a problem with the means of implementation or a challenge, then we need to be serious about that challenge, identify it and say, what is it? Let me take an example of this wonderful thing called Addis Ababa, which I would tell you publicly, I've said this in print, I think was a complete and total failure. And what came out of that, other than some good developments on technology, I'm talking about the finance part, was to tell governments, including in South Asia, what we already know. I know it's like saying you must eat healthy food. So you must raise more taxes. What are you going to say? You must raise less taxes? So when the counterfactual is absurd, then I begin to suspect when I hear statements like domestic resource mobilization is important, we need to innovate finance, that there is something behind this. There's a logic to it. And I want to tell you what my view of that logic is. My view of that logic simply is that the old division between countries that are rich and powerful and developed and countries that are not, including every country on this table, has not gone away, especially in terms of the means of implementation. The most obvious place it has not gone away is in the fact that the 0.7% of GDP target for LDCs, not for India, for LDCs, has disappeared from the landscape. What has replaced that is some loose talk about innovative financing, which frankly I don't understand. I'm a finance guy. And if you think that blended finance, innovative finance, all these pretty boutiques are going to make any kind of macro difference to the availability of resource mobilization, you are living in cloud cuckoo land. They are not. For least developed countries and for countries that still have some way to go on the development path, the political compact that development assistance would be provided in ample measure so that the basic financing and foreign exchange problems these countries face can be overcome, that has been recused from in Addis. And some domestic resource mobilization, innovative finance. I work with the Ministry of Finance. You think if I go and tell my minister you should raise more taxes, I would keep my job? He'll say, I know that. There is a reason why I'm not able to raise more taxes. And that reason does not have to do with my unwillingness. So this replacement of domestic resource mobilization as a sort of facsimile for aid, in the case of the LDCs, I think is something that we need to give far more voice to. And it is not being done, and it is an increase. I'm not blaming the UN for this, I've worked there. It is difficult to do it in the politics of the UN. Therefore, I think fora such as these should make that point, that this is not a substitute for official development assistance, one. And we have plenty of LDCs in our neighborhoods, so I think this is a very important point to make. When it comes to emerging economies like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, which is now doing far better than India, and I'm very happy about that, we have a problem which I want to lay before you very briefly in the time we have. You see, these countries don't want finance on concessional terms. They want finance on reasonable terms. And therefore, what they want, of course, is private sector financing for both public and private initiatives. And they have the economic base to do it. But the simple problem in these countries, which is a serious problem which nobody discusses when they talk about SDGs, is that when you want to invest in an SDG-friendly investment, forget health education, take something like infrastructure, then the financing that is available, if at all it is available, from the developed countries, which is where the finance still is, comes at between 200 to 250 basis points, 2 to 2.5% higher interest rate than financing for something like Walmart or a biscuit company. So if I set up a biscuit company in this country, I'll get money at 9.5. If I want to build a bridge, I'll get money at 12, because then what they cite is regulatory risk. We also know that despite the best efforts of the IFIs, when economies begin to move on the emerging space, then ultimately it is going to be private finance that is going to be important. And the discussion on how to attract private finance towards the SDGs, I'm afraid, has been very, very boutiquey. GDP bonds, blended finance, these are important at the project level. But at the level where I'm sitting, which is, then I need this finance to talk to the macroeconomic promise that the SDGs hold. So I'll transit to my third point. I want to say one more thing on technology, and I'll summarize and finish. So when you are talking here about the SDGs, I believe that for the last 2 days, every government has been saying what they did. Now, I want to ask you a question, or your finance ministers a question, so including mine. We're asking this in India. That by when does the SDGs end? 2030? Okay, 2030, doesn't matter. Mine is 2032. 2030, if you implement the SDGs successfully, what will be the per capita income of your country? Will it be 3 times what it is today? Will it be 4 times what it is today? Will it be only half of what it is today? Or will it be the same? If it is going to be 3 or 4 times, then that is where you start with the financing question, saying, then it becomes a problem of, intra-year shaping. I know I'll be 3 times richer in 12 years. Therefore, I know I will have the resources in 12 years to continue investing in maintaining the SDGs. So what I need is bridge financing to bridge that gap. That question has not been investigated or researched in the context of SDGs anywhere in the world. And this, for me, immediately as a macroeconomist, I begin to take it less seriously. I'm not denying that these intersections are important. We all know that by now.